Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's webcast, Bringing Coding to the Makerspace. It is sponsored by littleBits and School Library Journal. My name is Christine Leonard, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager for Education here at littleBits, and I am super excited to be your moderator today. But of course, before we go any further, we have a couple housekeeping items that we need to run through. If you have any technical problems, definitely use the Q&A window on the audience console, and the webcast tech team, who are experts at this, will get to you as soon as possible and will help you troubleshoot. If you have any questions or comments for the presenters, definitely send those questions through the Q&A window at any time. We are going to reserve some time for Q&A at the end, probably 10 to 15 minutes. So send those along at any time and we will definitely get to them. If for any chance we run out of time and we don't get to your question, somebody from littleBits or School Library Journal will be following up with answers to that. So don't worry if we don't get to your question today. If your screen becomes locked due to a local network congestion or anything like that, try using F5 to refresh. If you're on a Mac, use Command R. Today's slide presentation is also available for download in the green resources folder on the bottom menu dock. A certificate for continuing education credit is also available. It is in the resources folder as well, and it is labeled certificate. For those of you on Twitter, and I'm sure there are a lot of you, feel free to join the conversation there. We have a hashtag for today's event, hashtag SLJLittleBits, and you can certainly also follow us at littleBits or at SLJournal. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's presenter. We have David Saunders. David is an educator and library media specialist working in southwestern Connecticut, and he has an abiding love of good design, inquiry-based learning, and something that I'm sure all of you share, strong coffee. You can often find David in the library makerspace, tinkering with this or that. He is a Google certified innovator, trainer, and administrator, Raspberry Pi certified educator, littleBits global chapter leader, and a rockstar educator, Q rockstar faculty member, and Q Steampunk advisor. We also have Erin Mulcahy. Erin is the Senior Product Strategy Lead at littleBits Education. She's a scientist by training with her undergraduate degree in animal science and master's in conservation biology. She joined the littleBits team as a founding member in 2012. And I can attest to this quite personally. She loves working with our global network of littleBits educators to share their passion for learning and creativity. And we're going to start today with Erin. So Erin, the floor is yours. Erin, I think you might be on mute today. Are you?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're excited to spend the next 55 minutes or so with you. And today we are going to be talking about coding, and we have a very exciting product coming out on June 1st that we actually just announced recently, which is our code kit. And the whole idea of the kit is merging coding and games to make really amazing inventions. But before I dive into that and tell you more about that initiative, today we're just going to be talking a bit about the current situation with coding and STEM in education. And then if anyone is new to littleBits, I'll provide some background on what we are and what our mission is. And then we can dive into a bit of information on making and coding, specifically in the library, tell you a bit more about the coding kit, and then some additional tips, simple things you can do to start bringing in coding to your space. So today we are dealing with so much new technology, but as you know, there's so much technology use. Everyone has a cell phone and a laptop. Everyone's on social media. But in reality, we don't really know how these things work. We tend to think of technology as almost a black box. If things aren't working right, we take it to a technician. We don't necessarily know how to break it apart, see what's happening, and fix it ourselves. And also, coding has a really high barrier to entry. Until recently, coding was something that required a lot of skill and knowledge to be able to program and code successfully. And now that we're moving into a space where there are new programs and kids are learning to code at a younger age, we're coming into a really exciting time where we can bring this knowledge and information to our students in a much more exciting and engaging way. We also have so many different coding languages and platforms. It's hard to keep track of them all. And we also know that in STEM, we are training our students to use these hard skills like science, engineering, and technology, but we're still missing the mark on getting girls and students of color and lower income students into these fields that have a really demanding job market. And then we also know that the jobs of tomorrow are going to require more than just hard skills. They require creativity and innovation and teamwork. And we also know that coding skills are going to be part of this equation. So there are a lot of challenges that we need to tackle in education. And for us at littleBits, we know we can't do it all, but we can try to empower everyone. Everyone, no matter your age, your background, your gender, your location, to be able to create. And what we create are inventions. And how we do that is through a platform of easy-to-use electronic building blocks. And with littleBits, you can think of each individual piece as having a specific function. And the way that we have grouped them is actually by colors. So blue are your powers. So these are the bits that provide power to your circuit. Then you can have pink bits, which are inputs. So these are things that send information to your circuit. They can be controlled by either you or the environment, and they affect the bits that follow it. And then you can also have orange, which can be wires or logic. These provide additional connections or intelligence to your circuit. And then the things that actually provide output, like lights and sound and motion, these ones are green. And the beauty is that you can combine these in any combination to create these complex or really basic inventions, depending on what you'd like to build. But the magic really happens when you start adding bits and other materials. So you can quickly see how just 3 simple bits, power, input, and output, can be attached to a ruler. And you can now start making a bubble flute, for example, just with very simple construction materials. And with littleBits, we're always looking to work with new partners in both the hardware and software space. So in the past, we've worked with platforms such as IFT for our cloud bit, which connects to the internet. We worked with Arduino to bring some coding capabilities through C++. And then on the digital side, we are working in Google Docs to create customizable lessons for our new coding kit. And other ways that you can combine littleBits and hardware is through Makey, which is a conductive platform, as well as Lego, so you can add additional construction to your invention. And in the littleBits system, so our next focus is in the coding sphere, as I mentioned. But the idea of littleBits is that it's really a system that grows with you. So it's a very basic, you can have lights and sounds and switches and add motion, and then start building complexity through environmental sensors, basic logic and programming, coding. Cloud, which I mentioned, is the Wi-Fi bit. Actually, at the very top of the ladder, you could actually create your own bits, which is a very exciting way to extend your bit capabilities. And of course, it grows across the curriculum. So we've seen littleBits being used in a diversity of classrooms and subjects, spanning science, where you're looking at the electromagnetic spectrum, using light sensors and some of our RGB bits. We've seen schools do really wonderful units around inventors, where they study the history of invention and then bring it to life with littleBits. And art, you can create autonomous art bots that draw on their own, combining just the littleBit circuits and some simple materials. And then in math, you can actually start thinking about how computers are made and start teaching the binary number system with some simple logic gates. So today, the heart of what we wanted to discuss was the idea of making plus coding in the library. So taking these invention tools and adding coding to it. And we think the opportunity is super exciting. We recently, we've been inspired by Seymour Papert from the very beginning, who really was the father of constructionism. And this quote, I think, is really wonderful, in which he said, "Every maker of video games knows something that the makers of curriculum didn't seem to understand. And you'll never see a video game being advertised as being easy. Kids who do not like school will tell you it's not because it's too hard, it's actually because it's boring." And in the library, we have a wonderful opportunity to bring coding and making into the hands of our students and patrons. We have seen great success in schools who have a librarian who's really excited about the maker movement. And teachers and students are coming to the library and really seeing it as this hub of innovation. And then we see teachers going back to their classrooms and trying out techniques and tools that they've learned with their librarians. So there's this really great network that we see coming together. And we know that a lot of you are being asked to take the lead on developing these new programs and skills. And I think coding can just be seen as another tool for creation. We are working with visual programming tools that are easy, drag and drop if you haven't tried them out. Scratch is a great way, or Blockly is another tool that's super easy to use. It's not a scary coding environment anymore. It's fun, it's playful, there's animations, there's lights, there's sound. Kids are super excited to dive in. And ultimately what it comes down to, as Seymour Papert so eloquently described, is really kids want to do this. They want to be engaged in coding. And you'll see that they're so excited to dive in and try lots of different avenues for these activities. And so a bit about what we've been working on the product design team for the past year or so is actually the idea of merging hardware and software within the littleBits system. And we are creating this kit as really an introduction to coding, so you do not have to have any background in coding to get started. And again, it's the idea of making and playing games, which kids are super excited to create on their own, test out with friends, and then remix it to make it even more difficult or more exciting. And this is a simple way to look at it, where you're building these inventions with your circuit in real life. You're then coding your program on the computer, downloading that to your invention, and then you can play these games. So we are no longer just looking at the screen. We are combining hardware and software to create these real-world inventions. And for those of you who are familiar with littleBits, we do have some new bits in this kit, which I think you'll be really excited about. We have a littleBits code bit, which is really the brains of the operation. It enables you to connect your bits to the software. And how we do it is through the drag and drop software through Blockly, which is a Google program. We also have this really beautiful LED matrix, which you see on the screen here. You can do those really beautiful animations and add different score elements or different features to your games. And then after much, I'm sure a lot of people will be very happy about this, we finally have a rechargeable battery. And so you no longer have to have your 9-volt batteries or be attached to the wall outlet. This is something that you can charge up, just snap to your circuit, and your students will be ready to play for hours. And the inventions that are in the kit are really fun. And the kit itself has been created around core coding concepts. So your students will be engaging in loops, variables, logic, functions, to name a few. And the idea is that the app comes with these ideas for inventions, step-by-step inventions, and tutorials around the coding elements. But then they can take these inventions and make them their own through a phase we call remix. So they might change the circuit to have a different functionality, or they might change the code so it plays a different tune. or they might actually change the gameplay entirely and it's no longer a soccer game, but an entirely new concept that we haven't even thought of before. So you can think of these games as really just the beginning, and I think it's great in a library space because it doesn't require a lot of hand-holding. Kids could just use the program, create the invention, and then, like I said, grab a friend and try it out themselves. And they'll be probably in the library for an hour more than you want them to be, but we assure you that your kids will really dive in and make it their own. And then for additional support for both students and teachers, we do have the coding tutorials, which are a great way to move you through step by step into really understanding these concepts and bringing them to life. And again, it's the idea of merging the hardware with the software, so there's always that physical fun element that comes into play when they drag the blocks onto the screen and upload it to their bit. And as far as the app, we're currently working on the development, so this is just a sneak peek. But this is what I mean by the visual programming canvas, where all of these blocks are drag and drop. You can customize them to have different inputs and outputs. But you're getting the very basics of what it means to dive into these coding concepts. There will also be a toolbar on the right-hand side, again, helping students move through this in a self-guided way. There are tips if they get stuck. There'll be links to different FAQs, and there will also be video tutorials so they can see exactly what they need to do and get suggestions if they need it. And for educators, we do have a ton of resources. So if you are curious on how to set up your lesson, or if you want suggestions on how to run specific activities, we will have at least 10 lessons in the app. There are over 100 activities, as well as tons of support tools. We're working on coding certificates, debugging checklists, really cool journey maps that you can print out and put on the wall. The kit itself also comes with an invention cycle poster that you can put up. So lots of cool nuggets in here, and of course we do have standards alignment for those of you who are in a formal classroom environment, or teachers who come in, see their kids are really engaged and say, hey, this is something that I could bring into my space. We will have all of those resources available for you. So just a few more minutes to go over some tips and tricks if you think coding is right to bring into your space. And we've been co-designing our curriculum and kit experiences with an advisory committee of formal and informal educators near us in New York City. And these are some of the tips that have come out that I think are great considerations if you're just starting out your coding experience. But just know that there are tons of getting started activities that are perfect for students who just haven't had any coding experience yet, but are excited to dive in. Would absolutely suggest checking out Codeorg. Hour of Code is also a great time. It usually happens around December. Just 1 hour, and we've seen that kids really get hooked once they have a great first experience. And it's okay to learn alongside your students. This is something we really stress when we are working with teachers, is that it's all about the growth mindset, is that it's okay to not know the answer. We'll say, let's learn it together. And this is something that, your attitude really has a positive impact on students. Say that it's okay. If we fail the first time, it's just a learning experience and we'll get better the next time. When we're creating our onboarding experience, we have found that if you do try out the invention, build yourself as the educator, it's always best to learn hands-on. So if you go through it yourself and try it out, if you're bringing this to a larger workshop group or say in a formal class environment, you're going to have additional tips and tricks to share with your students as well. And as far as getting coding into your library and infused into the culture and the curriculum, connect with faculty. And what we mean by this is that the lunch and learn environment is a really great chance to show other faculty members what you're doing in the library, what your students have made, actually bring your kids in and have them demo the project so you can actually start connecting your students with the faculty at large. And just share the passion of what you're doing. You are your own best marketing tool. And so the more that you are able to provide examples and stories of the great things that you're doing, the more people will be excited to join in. And one of the things we've learned is when we move beyond the hardware space, software requires its own process. So if you're thinking about bringing in coding products or programs, suggest just getting insight into what your IT process is. You know, some places we've seen take 3 weeks to get permission for uploading all your apps. It's always good to have a plan ahead of time. And that's something that we will have in our toolkit is an implementation plan and checklist to help you along your way. And another, I think our last tool here is creating a community code. And what we mean by this is have an agreed upon list of tips and respectful strategies that you and your students agree upon. And this can be things like having students know to treat tools with respect. So we say tools, not toys. If you have a specific area that you need your equipment returned to, make that very clear. And if you're not in a one-on-one or group situation with your students, having posters or simple reminders is a great way to make sure that the tools that you invest in will be able to be available for students for many years to come. So I think that is, one more. Of course, have fun. There is something magical when students are able to code something on the screen and then see something come to life in their own hands. And students will be able to take their coding adventures in all sorts of directions. So ultimately, enjoy the process, learn from your students, and don't be afraid to dive in. And I'm going to pass this over to David, who has some additional tips for how to bring coding into your makerspace.
Hey everyone, thanks Erin. That was a super awesome intro, and I have to say, I don't think I could overemphasize how excited I am about the new littleBits code kit. And I'm going off the cuff here a little bit, but I will admit that when we repurposed our library space into our library space, littleBits was like the backbone of a lot of the work that we were doing with students around design thinking, invention literacy, and just trying to reimagine what this library space could be for us. And so, littleBits has a really special place in my heart. And for those of you who are listening who maybe are new to littleBits, they have an exceptionally wonderful community of tinkerers and inventors and educators who are constantly sharing their work on the littleBits community website. So you could hop in there to get inspired by ideas. I've seen people, in fact, my friend Nathan Stevens, who runs a makerspace at a school, one of the activities that he does is he has students go in and grab one of the video tutorials or one of the tutorials on the littleBits community site and try and recreate the project, and then try and improve upon the instructions. And so he's trying to bring in both sort of instructions, editing and revising and clarifying language, all in the interest of forwarding the momentum of this community. Anyway, I'm super excited to talk to you a bit about bringing coding into the library makerspace. I think we've been exploring this path now for about 4 years or so. I think it was about 4 years ago that I first submitted a proposal to our administration to repurpose a section of our library as a makerspace. And at that point in time, I had to sit down with admin and sort of describe what a makerspace was, because it wasn't that long ago that makerspaces were a fairly new concept. And so having that conversation and trying to define what we imagine that space could be, and then trying to bring it to reality. And it's a constant ebb and flow. We're evolving as the needs of the school change, as the students change year after year, and we're continuing to try and keep our eyes on the prize here and continue to build programs and space to support the instructional goals that we have as a community. And I'm really excited about not only what we've done, but I'm more excited about the things that are ahead for us. And, I think about coding in the makerspace, I think, like, what is the point? And I think Christine and Aaron kind of discussed it a little bit. I mean, Code.org, which was brought up earlier, they make this statement: computer science drives innovation in the U.S. economy and society. Despite growing demand for jobs in the field, it remains marginalized throughout the U.S. K-12 education system. And that's super important. Like, as a parent, as an educator, I want to make sure that my children and my students are ready for the jobs of the future. We want to make sure that they have the literacy and the facility to approach these jobs that exist now, but also the ones we continually talk about that don't exist yet. The jobs, in 5 or 10 years that we can't even imagine what they're going to be. That is really important stuff. But I think, it goes a little bit deeper when we talk about, those soft skills. We talk about those, we sometimes call them non-cognitive skills, although I have a little bit of a problem with that term. More the mission skills, assessment skills, things like resilience and whatnot. And I think that those skills overlap a lot with what the vision is that we have for school and library makerspaces. And those are, we want students to have experience with logical thinking, with problem solving, persistence, collaboration, communication. All of these are really, really important. And, to some degree, I think when we talk about coding and programming, there's a little bit of language agnosticism. Whether they learn Python or another language, at this point, I'm not that concerned about it. I'm more concerned about how could using and being exposed and have experience with that language help to support these skills. Because, these are the skills that are going to set our students up for success, not only in the workplace of the future, but in life in general. And so, I find that we're in a place right now, it's a wonderful, magical place where we have, this is just a small sampling. We have so many tools at our disposal right now to help us support coding instruction, not only in our makerspaces, but in the classroom, at home, on vacation, wherever it is. A lot of these are on apps that you can download and have in your mobile devices for traveling and car trips and all these things. Like, we have so many tools at our disposal. It's incredible, but it's also a bit overwhelming, right? Like, where do I begin? Which ones are appropriate for the grade level that I teach? Where do I, start thinking about adding in things like Python or HTML or CSS, or do I think about using robots? Is that the best way to do it? Or should I stick mostly to things like block-based programming, like Scratch and Tinker? There are so many options out there that it can become a little bit overwhelming, I found. And there's constantly new ones being released all the time. And it's an amazing time. And so in thinking through what I wanted to go through with you today, I wanted to do a little bit of a resource dump and try and maybe pinpoint a few specific resources that would be of help to you and also to all of us as we think about trying to support our individual communities, but also our larger community. And so, when I think about the challenge, the task of introducing coding instruction into our library makerspace, there are so many things that we could think about and talk about and really unpack. We were fortunate this week at our school to have hosted our first ever Maker Fair. It was a ton of work on the part of our technology team here, and we were able to bring in teachers and administrators from schools all over the area, and we were able to bring in as a keynote speaker Sylvia Martinez, who wrote the book Invent to Learn, which is considered, the Bible of maker education. And she came and she spoke eloquently and passionately about giving students the ability to make things that have meaning for them, because that's where the money is, right? That's where, we could stand up there and we could tell them about, conditional loops, and we could talk to them about formatting. We could talk, and to some degree that's important, but there's also a point at which we need to let them take the reins. We need to let them take the steering wheel, maybe is a more modern way of saying that, and drive their own learning. Because I think that's really where the meaningful, authentic learning takes place. And so, as words of advice before we get started here, I would say step number one is trust your students. I have a friend and really a colleague hero of mine, Sam Patterson, who works out in Los Angeles, and he's doing incredible things. I'm going to come back to Sam in a few minutes, but Sam has sort of a motto. He runs a Makerspace for lower school students in LA, and one of his mottos, he's a really great way of simplifying really complicated ideas into memorable gems. And I was talking to him last night about what we were going to be talking about today, and he said, if I were to say anything about introducing coding with students, I would say under-deploy and under-instruct. And I was like, under-deploy and under-instruct, like, what do you mean by that? And he went on to sort of describe, when we become consumed with the idea of, make sure every student has a device. One, you want to make sure they're providing them with the tools that they need. We might be limiting their ability to collaborate, right? And so by under-deploying, we're to some degree creating. They need to share. They need to talk through their thinking. They need to explain.
Hey, David, you're breaking up a little bit. Could you repeat maybe that last sentence and maybe speak close to the microphone?
Sure. Is that better right there?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. So his point basically being that by under-deploying devices, we're creating an environment where students are more likely and more encouraged to collaborate with each other. And then the second part of that is to under-instruct. And this overlapped greatly with what Sylvia Martinez said as well, which is we tend to stand up and try and teach too much instead of providing an environment where students can explore and learn on their own. And giving students the opportunity to discover and fail and discover and move forward. And so I thought under-deploy and under-instruct was a pretty succinct and appropriate way of thinking about how we might begin creating those types of environments around coding in the curriculum. The other piece of advice, or not even advice, that sounds in some way condescending, not advice at all, something that I have learned. And this was a lesson that was earned and I've had to learn it many times over the years. And I don't know that this one could be overemphasized, right? I think we as librarians and educators and as parents, we need to model the growth mindset. That came up earlier in Aaron's comments as well. The growth mindset, we need to model the idea that we're all in this together. We need to model how do we troubleshoot, how do we problem solve, how do we break down problems step by step and try and identify solutions for them. How do we flip that paradigm of I'm the teacher and you're the student and create an environment where we all have things to teach and we all have things to learn? And this is a tough one I have found emotionally, personally, and also working with teachers. And so I would really encourage you to, if you are in some way hesitant to begin exploring coding in your makerspace, in your library or your classroom because you're unfamiliar or you're uncomfortable with it, to provide your students access to some of the tools that we'll talk about today and to sit down with them and be open and let them explain it to you. Let them sort of guide what's happening. And I think that you'll find that your experience will be opened up and you will walk away from that feeling more empowered to continue down this path of coding instruction. So what I want to do now is just sort of pinpoint for you a few specific resources and then talk a little bit more about how they're being used in the library. The first was already mentioned, Codeorg. It is, without a doubt, the gold standard when it comes to code programming curriculum, because not only is it used for the hour of code, and it's a great way to pop in and do specific activities, Codeorg also provides full curriculum with full lesson plans and scope and sequence, and everything is mapped out to standards. And this allows students, after maybe having that experience during the hour of code, to dig deep into the other materials and resources that are on there. It's a really easy on-ramp, and it's sort of going back to the idea of low ceilings, wide walls, low floors. Is there such a thing as a low floor? Wide walls and high ceilings. This is a great example of one. You could have lower school students jump on, do some activities, and that might light the fire for them and spark their curiosity on other things that they could do. And Code.org is a really great resource for providing that depth of resource. So if you haven't checked out Code.org, absolutely move beyond the hour of code section and explore some of the other curricular materials that are on there. Another one that has come up recently, and one that I have personally had some experience with this year, is Google's CS First program. And this is primarily for 4th through 8th grade students. And it's run on a system of clubs. So as a librarian or as a classroom teacher, as a volunteer for a community organization, you could form a club, and then you simply facilitate that club, because the CS First program provides a full curriculum, and that curriculum is differentiated, and it also provides lots of different entry points. And so primarily it uses Scratch as the foundation, which is the block-based programming. And there are different avenues of interest for the CS First curriculum. So there's storytelling, and there is fashion and design, there's animation, there's art. And I have found to be a really deep well of resources and support for students who are interested in exploring some pretty complicated computer science principles in a really accessible way. And it, to some degree, takes the onus off of you to be the expert in the room. You can simply facilitate. You could add yourself as a group member and participate in the activities along with your students. And doing them with students and with my own kids at home, I found them to be really rewarding and really fun. The next one, I think, is certainly one of my favorites, the RaspberryPi.org community website. Raspberry Pi is a $35 computer, and they have an incredible selection of resources that have been created by their education team. And they focus primarily on things like physical computing, using Python. They pull a lot from the do-it-yourself community. They do a lot of work around the Internet of Things. And they do it in ways that are exciting and interesting for students, because they sort of couch them in Minecraft. They couch them in, little tricks and funny tricks that you can pull on your parents or your friends, and it allows you to be really sort of interested from the outset, like, oh, what is that cool little project? And then once you start digging into it, they provide step-by-step instructions on how to set things up. Anything from a GIF camera to a time-lapse camera to automatronic teddy bears to hacking Minecraft. And Raspberry Pi, I feel like, is an interesting product because it draws from not only educators but also a wide range of really in-the-trenches hackers and do-it-yourselfers. And it can be a little intimidating because some of those people out there are doing unbelievably incredible things with a Raspberry Pi. And so it might be a little bit intimidating to think about, well, what am I going to do with it? And I think the people at Raspberry Pi recognize that, and they're really keen to build relationships with educators. And to that point, the last couple of years, they've offered a 2-day training program for educators called PiCademy. And you can apply for it. They're trying to do it maybe 3 or 4 times a year, I believe. And they're doing it not only in England, but also here in the States now. And it's a great way for you to go and meet up with other like-minded educators and spend 2 days just learning all about how to use coding and Raspberry Pi to support the curricular goals that you have in your library and in your school. Another resource that I would absolutely point you towards is Sam Patterson, who I mentioned earlier, and his website, mypaperlessclassroom.com. He is the author of the book Programming in the Primary Grades, Beyond the Hour of Code, and he's really doing some pretty remarkable things. He's a poet. He's an education thought leader. He's a puppet master. He does a lot of work with puppets. He does a lot of video work with puppets, and a lot of instruction comes through puppets. And I think Sam's really kind of pushing our understanding of what's possible with maker technology and maker mindset with younger students. For example, one of his most recent blog posts was, can a first grader build a computer? In which he put one of his first grade classes through an experiment with them to see if they were able to put together a functional computer using the Kano computer kit. And he's doing a lot of work around coding for pre-literate students and also specifically coding to support literacy instruction. And so those are 2 places I would definitely point you towards, mypaperlessclassroom.com and also his book, Programming in the Primary Grades, which are both excellent resources. So specifically, we're going to talk about maybe some programs and some projects here. I guess I would start off by saying this is a lethal and unbelievable mind-bending combination. Scratch and Makey equals just mind-blowing awesomeness. And we talked a bit about Scratch earlier. It's sort of, glue that holds a lot of this stuff together. It's free to use. It's super easy on-ramping, but the ability to do really complicated computing is available to you. And so you may have kids in your library or in your schools who are working in Scratch on incredibly complicated projects. I've been totally blown away by some of the things that some of our students are doing here at our school, and they'll come in and say, here's what I did last night, and like just trying to follow their thinking on all these different problems and all these conditional formatting things that are popping up is incredible, right? Give them the opportunity, give them exposure, give them access, and then see where it takes them. And then Makey, for sure, we'll talk specifically about Makey, is just such a cool, simple product that, again, is really easy to use right out of the box. But the potential for this tool is really through the roof. It is unbelievable. And I wanted to pinpoint for you just a few specific examples of people using Scratch and Makey to support what's happening in their libraries and classrooms. And the first one I would point to is a blackout poetry project that Colleen Graves recently did. Colleen Graves is a high school librarian in Texas, and she is so amazing. If you're not following Colleen on Twitter and subscribe to her blog, you absolutely should. Every day it seems like she is pushing the boundaries of what we can do in the library with maker technology, wearable technology. She's really a rock star and doing really great things. And so she recently did a project where she collaborated with one of her English teachers. They were doing a blackout poetry unit. And so Colleen thought, wouldn't it be interesting to see what we could do in terms of some of the materials and tools that we have here in our Makerspace in the library. And so what they did was they combined Scratch and Makey and graphite from pencils to create a circuit that would read aloud the blackout poem. So they had the students record their blackout poem into the computer, save it as a WAV file, upload it into Scratch, and then program it such that when different parts of the poem were touched with a finger, you would hear the student reading the blackout poem. And just a really awesome way to support some of the poetry and language arts work that was happening in their school, and just in time for Poetry Month. Really great project there. And then another one that we recently just finished up here at our school was a video game project. And this was a 6th grade project. We had our students, we gave them about 4 weeks to code a video game of their own making. Could be any kind of game, whatever game they wanted to make. However, there were some minimum expectations as to what it is that they needed. You know, there were a certain number of levels that they needed to have for it. They needed to have an instructions opening screen. They needed to have a certain number of scenes and characters. And once they had their game finished, I think we gave them about 4 weeks for that. We then introduced them to Makey and the idea of making simple circuits and conductivity. And we gave them a whole bunch of maker materials, cardboard and model magic and conductive tape and all different types of things. And we challenged them to create a custom game controller that was in some way thematically related to the games they had coded. And so we gave them about 3 weeks for that, and they came up with some really, really awesome controllers, really creative, really fun custom controllers for their game. And then the third and final step was we then hopped over to our Raspberry Pi computers. And when you're using the Raspberry Pi operating system, it comes preloaded with a piece of software called Sonic Pi, which allows you to compose music using all of the different play and the sleep and the functions and the repeats and all of that. And so we had them create and compose soundtrack for their video game, and they needed to make sure that the video game soundtrack was resonant with sort of the theme and the emotion of the game they had created. So in other words, if it was a spooky game, it should be sort of a spooky soundtrack, and so forth and so on. And so the video game project was a great way to sort of tie together Scratch, Makey, and also our Raspberry Pi and Sonic Pi work. Super fun. A lot of ability for students to explore and express themselves creatively in this project, and it was a lot of fun. So when thinking about Makey, it's a really fun, out-of-the-box, simple to use, but there also are a ton of applications for it across the curriculum. And so if you are not familiar with Makey, they're relatively cheap. You can pick them up for $25 or whatever. And then you can go to makey.com/lessons, and there you're going to find tons of lesson ideas that you could employ in your library tomorrow if you wanted to. So definitely check out makey.com/lessons. And definitely check out Colleen and Aaron Graves' book. They have 20 Makey projects for the evil genius, and they're doing some pretty mind-blowing stuff in their library with Makey. So absolutely check out that book. She has a wealth of information and ideas and inspiration. And then the third piece here I would talk about real quick is robots. Robots for me combine the digital and the physical, and they also combine together play and learning. And we use robots a lot in our library to support some of the coding instruction that we do. The first robot that we really work with in 4th grade is the Sphero. And we use this in a number of different ways. The Sphero, you can install an app, a free app called Spark, S-P-R-K, and it's a block-based programming app where students can explore all of the different conditionals and loops and all of the things that they've learned in Scratch in the digital, and now they're actually controlling something in physical space, which is pretty awesome. And so giving them the opportunity to explore what's happening when I do this, and then come back and observe together, well, I noticed this, and when I did this, this is what happened, and then to do some predicting. So what do you think will happen after that happens? Or what would you, if you change that, what would happen there? And Sphero I have found to be fairly simple to use and just full of possibilities. They're waterproof. You can do a lot of really fun water experiments with them. And what we do here in the library at the end of our 6th grade year is we have students create a miniature golf course in the library, and students then have to program their Spheros to get the lowest score on the mini golf course in the library. Super fun. The next one sorry, I'm jumping ahead there. There are a lot of resources at Sphero.com/education for how teachers are using Spheros in their classroom and in their library. So definitely check that out. The next I would say that I have really loved this year is Dash and Dot. And they're adorable, but don't underestimate the power that they bring. They are fully programmable. You can get them to speak, move, change colors, and they come with all of these great extensions like ping pong ball launchers and xylophones, so you can program them to play different songs. And I've seen lots of teachers use these in really interesting ways. One friend of mine, Doug Robertson, out in Seattle, did a jousting competition using Dash. And so he had students not only learning about jousting and social studies, but then they had to equip their Dash to be a jouster, and then they had jousting competitions, and that was super fun. And again, just like most of these other products, they have specific sites for resources. Teachers.makewonder.com/lessons. Lots of great stuff there. And then finally, the last one is the Oozobot. And this is a really interesting one in that Oozobot uses color. You can use different sequences of color to change its action and behavior. And it's a really cool way to combine together analog and digital tools. And it allows students to think about coding in a different way, because you're not really coding in the same way you are with Scratch. You're kind of coding with color instead. And so that opens up opportunities to do things around maps and art. And there is a block-based coding program for it as well called Oozobot. But so you could do a combination of the two there. And just like all of the others, Oozobot.com/STEM education/STEM lessons. So you're probably saying at this point, like, oh my gosh, like so many tools, like what, how much money is this going to cost, right? Thankfully, quite a few of the apps are free. Certainly some of the robots cost money. CS First is free and Scratch is free, and a lot of other things that I've mentioned today are free, but the robots are not. So I would just plug one thing. I'm on the advisory board for Q Steampunk, and Q is Computer Using Educators, which is a fairly outdated name for an organization at this point. But there's a really awesome program called Steampunk where you can create an account with them for free and then request a rental, and they will pack up for you a Pelican case full of Spheros or full of Makey-Makeys or full of littleBits even, and send them to your school for several weeks so that you can try them out before you decide whether or not you want to purchase them. And I have found that to be incredibly useful as I think about utilizing the budget that we have here in the library. And so I know I'm running a little bit behind here, so I'm just going to end with this last quote. And I think this one, Sylvia Martinez brought this one up to us on Tuesday in her keynote, and it just sung to me. The role of the teacher is to create the conditions for invention rather than provide ready-made knowledge. And I think this idea of incorporating and introducing coding instruction into our makerspaces is a wonderful opportunity for us to create those conditions for students to explore and discover and have authentic learning experiences. And I'm done.
Thank you, David. That was awesome. And thank you to Aaron, too. There's so much great stuff in there. And we see some of the ideas that you touched on popping up everywhere. In fact, this week the New York Times had an article on computational thinking and how that allows kids and everybody to solve problems. And so it's not just about coding. It's about creativity and computational thinking. And I love all these things that popped up, as well as the very practical tools. So for those of you listening, if you have any questions, get them in so we can ask them of our presenters. But we did have a couple come in that I'll start asking now. One of them is, I find that some of my kids don't always naturally seek out the what's next after finishing a tutorial. Any suggestions to help foster curiosity and playfulness? And how do you get beyond that finished feeling and getting them to ask the next question? So David, I'm going to give that one to you to start off.
Yeah, that's a really great question. In fact, I was just in a meeting a little while ago where we talked about students coming into our engineering lab in the upper school and kind of saying, I don't really know what I want to do, or I did this thing and now I'm not really sure what I want to do. And how do you provide that spark for them? And I think one of the things that we have found here in our community is to have them identify, so for example, here's a specific example rather than talk about generalities. We had a teacher here on Tuesday for our Maker Fair talk about how he supports design thinking with his students. And one of the things that he does is he has his students go on a walking tour of the campus and to be really observant about the physical architecture, the landscaping, parking, all of sort of that infrastructural stuff around campus, and to try with a really critical eye to discover, like, what might be improved upon? What could we make better there? Like, oh, why would the buses be parked there at 2:45 when it would back up traffic? Like, there must be a way to try and train them a little bit to think critically about their environment and to identify places where they could make an improvement. And so that's sort of big picture, but I think, we're thinking about coding and making it meaningful, to go back to what Sylvia said. Like, what is it about that particular student who might be a bit indifferent about what they're doing? What is it that drives them? What is that trigger for them that would get them excited about exploring something around coding? Is it Minecraft? That for us is always a huge one. Is it Harry Potter? I know that littleBits did a Harry Potter design challenge, a while back. Like, that drew a ton of interest because it tied into that natural interest and passion that people have for the Harry Potter stories. So I think to some degree there's not sort of a single answer for that. I think it's differentiated and individualized to that particular student. What is it that drives them? What is it that will make whatever next step they have and make meaningful for them? And so, using the design thinking protocol, that certainly has helped us here identify, certain next steps for us. But that's certainly sometimes a challenging place to be, where you have a class of students that you're needing to manage, and you have one student who can't quite find what it is that they're interested in doing next.
I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah,
I was just going to add to that. I think anytime you can just support the culture of curiosity, always encouraging students to ask what if or what next. And one of the tools that we found is super helpful is having a feedback matrix. For us, it's a 2x2 grid that we can hand out, and there are headers at the top that say glow, grow, question, idea. So if you have a student who's struggling, you could pair them up with another student, give them that sheet, and then they could have a conversation about ways to improve the invention. And they might come at it from a totally different perspective, and then you're also building that communication and sharing element of the invention. So just one additional tip.
Thank you. Looking at some of the questions and looking at the attendee list, we have several people here from public libraries, not just school libraries, and that is fantastic. One question is very tactical, is that can public libraries rent from Steampunk? And David, I don't know if you can answer that. If not, we will find the answer. But then the second part of that question for David is this idea of structured versus unstructured with coding. How structured should it be? Can you have kids and students or even families learning coding in unstructured environments? And David, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. The first part of your question, it's a great one. I don't actually know the answer to that one, but I know who I could ask, and I could get that answer as soon as we're finished here. Structured versus unstructured. Yeah, I think I can speak about my experience. My experience has been primarily unstructured because, in the library, I have a lot of flexibility curricularly to make decisions as I see fit in the best interest of the students. And I think that when you provide unstructured opportunities for students to build and create, that there are students who are going to naturally gravitate towards wanting a little bit more structured, linear curricular exposure, and we can provide that for them. And there are some students who are really going to learn more and get more out of the unstructured experiences and project building that we do here. And so I think to some degree, it's somewhat important, I think, for them to maybe have some concrete, explicit instruction on, like, here's how to get started with whatever. But I have found more often than not, they discover that on their own much more readily than if I were to tell it to them. And it's more meaningful when they do it that way. And so, I think in my library, I would say we're almost 100% unstructured coding, but we do get quite a bit of it done here. We are able, even with the Sonic Pi program that we did, like, we didn't explain it to them. We said, here's this program, like, open it up, what do you notice? What happens? Why do you think when it's play 60, what does that sound? What's the 60 stand for? Or you think, right? Okay, what if you put 70 in there, right? So we're not really leading them through like step by step. We're just having them explore and then observe and reflect a bit and then predict on what's going to happen next. And we found that to be a bit more, I don't know, it provides a little bit more of an authentic learning experience for some. I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, it does help, and that was exactly kind of what I wanted to provide for everyone here. We are unfortunately out of time. There are several questions in there that we didn't get to, and we will be following up with them. So please be on the lookout for answers to those in the next day or so. Please remember to visit the resources folder so you can download today's presentation and get your continuing education certificate. And we really want to thank everybody for attending today. Thank you to David and Aaron and School Library Journal. This webcast will be archived, and we will be sending you an email to let you know when it's available. And you can also find this webcast and other archives and upcoming webcasts at slj.com/webcast. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you soon.